Hello everyone, and welcome to another of our live streams as we look forward to the US Grand Prix in Austin this weekend. Yet another sprint race. Can't say I'm enthusiastic about that. The beginning of a triple header as well. Austin, Mexico, Brazil. Wow. Everybody talking about the American continent. This is the last big tour of the season. Blah, blah, blah. Max Verstappen and Red Bull, meanwhile, still celebrating their world championship. Yeah, but lots to talk about going into Austin, I think. It's not only about winning the championship and who's going to be the new title holder. It's also about, I guess, the also-rans and who's going to win on the day anyway. And let's face it, there's two chances of winners in Austin in these sprint race weekends. And as we saw, as recently as Qatar, when none other than Oscar Piastri won for McLaren, that anything is possible. So we'll be talking about that. We'll be going into that. But first of all, just a bit of a recap on the news between Qatar and now. You've probably all heard about it. Bernie Ecclestone pleaded guilty. What did he plead guilty to? I mean, trying to work this one out, actually. I think he pleaded guilty to forgetting that he'd set up a trust of the value of approximately £400 million in Singapore when asked about this as long ago as 2015. Now, you've got to assume that he had it set up prior to 2015, but let's assume it was 2014. So that's what, 8 years? Now, Mr. W Money, Bernie Ecclestone, the man that Jochen Rindt, the second driver that Bernie managed, when asked to describe Bernie, he said, well, Bernie's the only guy I've ever met in the world. He said this in an Austrian accent, of course. I've ever met in the world who can walk into the second-hand car room and give me the value of every car, exact value of every car, and then what you can sell that car for within about 5 minutes. So on that basis, I cannot even begin to imagine that Bernie, over a, 7-year period, just to be kind, probably longer, wouldn't have at least doubled his money on that 400. I know it was in trust and it wasn't actually in his bank account, but nonetheless, wouldn't have at least doubled it. And he's got off, suspended sentence. He was going to get 18 months prison, but suspended sentence, so nothing, by paying 653 million to the Inland Revenue. So I think deep down inside, he's probably saying, well, it's the best deal of the year, isn't it? Yeah, good one. Knowing Bernie. But anyway, I shouldn't say any more probably, but I just think it's kind of strange, isn't it? That, is it all catching up with him now? Now that he's in his 90s? I don't think it is. I think he's still Mr. Teflon, isn't he? I mean, how many people actually plead guilty to not filing £400 million worth of assets, let's call it cash assets, whatever it was, and then get away with it? Anyway, brilliant. Good on him. I mean, that's why Formula One is the way it is. It's why Formula One is so successful, because of the building blocks that Bernie created for this business model. So here he is. There he is. You've probably seen this picture, but if you haven't, there he is, celebrating his guilty plea in a donut store afterwards, getting a donut. There he is in his suit. A man of simple tastes. Yeah, so that was one. And it's all been about people, isn't it? Because then we had the whole Lance Stroll palaver after Qatar. Now, I have to confess that I didn't see anything. I didn't see Lance do anything that was remotely out of the ordinary compared with the behavior of many of the Formula One drivers, or Formula 2 or Formula 3 or other drivers that you see around the world, racing drivers. I mean, brushing aside his physio is a little bit, normal, isn't it? Okay, it's not Nelson Piquet bashing Elio Salazar at the end of the German Grand Prix. As Salazar always said, he kept his helmet on, so what was Nelson thinking? Going for the face, hitting the guy's helmet. Anyway, pushing it wasn't that bad. I think more to the point is why they just gave him such a lenient penalty after that business last year in Austin when he took Fernando Alonso off on the straight. That was 1,000,000,000 times worse than anything he did after Qatar when he got out of the car. And he just got, 5-place grid penalty or something pathetic at the next race. And here they are, it's a big thing about, he pushed his physio. And I had to laugh actually, because the FIA said in describing all this that he was going to be, the whole ethics committee and all this stuff. We're going to be looking at it all. And then they in the thing, they said, well, he has apologized. So, we will only issue him with a warning, but we have a zero tolerance approach to this. Well, if it's zero tolerance, why are they only giving him a warning? I mean, what's that all about? Zero tolerance is zero tolerance. Same with Lewis. Lewis, in Qatar, after the first corner shunt, start line shunt almost, with George Russell, gets out of his car. And it was kind of difficult to see this at the time live. There was so much going on, I suppose. But apparently he crossed the track before the track had been declared, before he was signalled that he could cross the track. In other words, the track was cold, the track was still hot. And I think that's a terrible thing to do, actually. And I think the FIA are quite right to point out, as a former world champion, as a senior driver, he does need to set a responsibility. And I know he would have been thinking of a million other things, but, we all remember what happened to Tom Price in South Africa, and I hope Lewis does as well. And the reason we have these rules today, is because of everything that went before us. And for those out there that say, oh, history's not important, it's boring, and I know a lot of people do say that, as recently as the build-up to the Vegas US Grand Prix, I'm not going to drop anybody in it here, but somebody very high up in American promotional areas for that race, for the Vegas race, when there was talk about Ayrton Senna and something to do with Ayrton, and he said, US fans aren't interested in Ayrton Senna. And, I think we actually turn our back on history at our own peril. And yes, it was a minor thing that Lewis did, but it's respect for the rule as distinct from the moment that matters. And as a former world champion, or indeed as a world champion, you have to show respect for the rules and the history of the sport. That's my view. And I think, there's long before the FIA became a lot more judicious and had as many rules as they have, and the teams and Liberty were bunched together in the way they are, the world champion was always looked on as the sort of father figure of Formula One, and he was setting the tone for the way people saw Formula One. He had an enormous responsibility if you won the world championship. John Surtees, 64, Jim Clark, Graham Hill. All of them felt a sense of responsibility. And I'm not sure that drivers today feel that sense of responsibility if they do win a title. They win the title and it's number one, and jumping on the car and embracing, and 10 days of celebration and partying. But is there any sense of, now we've got this responsibility, we've got this title, we need to start setting an example, or perhaps campaigning for something that they've been wanting to campaign for many years? I'd love to see that sense of responsibility coming back again. And I'm one of the world's biggest Lewis fans, but I do think that crossing the track before you are given the okay by the marshals and the race director or whatever it is it's just showing disrespect for the history of the sport and some of the terrible things that have happened in the past. And in the build-up to the F1 exhibition, actually, I came across a letter that I wrote to Bernie circa, I don't know, it must have been it was one of the first Rio races. It must have been 78, I think. And I wrote to Bernie saying, I was absolutely appalled to see photographers crossing the track after lap one, and did Tom Price die in vain? And this is just ridiculous. How can this happen? And to his credit, Bernie actually replied and said, yeah, totally agree, it's completely wrong, we're going to have to do something about it. So it's been going on for a long time, this stuff, and by now everybody should know you do not cross a racetrack. Anyway, I always sort of begin all this, don't I, with all this. So Lance Stroll with his zero tolerance, letting him go, to me that's very strange. So there we are. Just a few things. Build up to the US Grand Prix. Somebody I'm sure will raise the subject, but just as a reminder, it seems that the compounds that Pirelli choose are much more significant than most people think. And so far, it's absolutely been the case that whenever we run the softest tyres in the compound range, McLaren have always gone well. So it hasn't been very difficult to predict when McLaren are going to go well. It is the medium 3 compounds in the range in Austin, and that's going to change things a little bit. I think we can talk about that a little bit later on, but it does mean, I think, that Ferrari and Mercedes will have to work less hard to get the tyres in the groove, in the sweet spot. Put Red Bull to one side because they're bound to be good regardless. But I think you'll see Ferrari particularly going quite well in Austin. And I think Mercedes will probably have a half reasonable weekend by their standards. They might even be up there with McLaren. You know, they might have a bigger sweet spot here because they're not having to live with that, having to make that very hard compound work in the way McLaren does. And McLaren have a lot of downforce. And I'm not sure that's going to help them massively around Austin, because it's a long straight down. That's why I say Ferrari, I think, are going to go well, because Ferrari pretty good in terms of top speed and very good in terms of braking from high speed. Not better than Red Bull, but at least they're not bad at that. Let's put it that way. So let's get down to some questions, as we always do. For those who are new to the show, don't be put off by the amount of time I take to get the question up, because it's a fairly Heath Robinson process of copying a question from YouTube and then pasting it in my edit suite. And there's no way of doing this in a way that is simple, because I'm an Apple Mac guy. That's my excuse. If I was a PC guy, apparently there is something that would work really well. But here you go. Mind you, at the moment, I'm staring at my charger level, battery level, and I'm a bit nervous because I've never had, hang on, it's 11% now. It was 7% and now it's 11%, even though it's been on charge. I think the battery in the computer is gone. So long as I got it plugged in, I think we'll be fine. But I'm dreading having to take the computer to a computer store and get a new battery put in, and how long that's going to take, who knows. Anyway, Aaron Lee. Hi, Peter. What were some of the unusual adaptations in driving style required to drive certain unusual cars in the past, e.g. four-wheel drive, turbines, fan car, six-wheeler, CVT? Well, four-wheel drive, the car was the four-wheel drive Ferguson, which was the sort of first proper four-wheel drive Formula One car. It was a front-engine car, but it was a very good car out of the box, really. Stirling Moss won the Gold Cup in '61 in the wet. Graham Hill was second at Lakeside in the wet in '62 in Australia. And Jack Farman was pretty quick in the car in the wet at the '61 British Grand Prix at Aintree as well. So adaptations. Anybody in a four-wheel drive Ferguson back in the early '60s in the rain didn't have to change their style. They just had a lot more grip front to rear, and the car was really good in the wet. Later on, when four-wheel drive came into vogue in the late ss's, particularly the '69 season, when you had Matra, Lotus, McLaren, Matra was a space frame chassis from memory, all building four-wheel drive cars. The problem then was weight, really. It was steering a little bit as well, heavy steering, but it was mainly just the weight of the car. And again, that didn't require much in terms of driver adaptation. It was just like people like Derek Bell in that McLaren, that four-wheel drive McLaren. It was a very heavy car, and it was quite a difficult car to drive and balance because it was so heavy. And I think that was the same. Jochen Rindt never liked the Lotus 63, and he never made any effort to adapt his driving style to it. John Miles said it was a bit of a complete nightmare to drive as well. So there weren't any really good four-wheel drive cars. So that's four-wheel drive at that point. Turbine, talking to Dave Walker about that, and Emerson when I came over in '72. They'd both driven that car in '71, the Turbine Lotus four-wheel drive, and both of them spoke about the throttle lag and also the weight of the car as well because of the four-wheel drive thing. But throttle lag was a big thing on that Turbine. You thought you had it bad on the turbocharged cars of the '80s. The Turbine was another world, and so that was a very difficult car. Everybody gave Dave Walker a hard time for going off in the '71 Dutch Grand Prix in the wet when he should have been really good in that car. But he said, it was just unbelievable throttle lag. It was very, very difficult to drive it. And so again, it wasn't something you can really adapt to, because what is throttle lag? It's just like waiting and waiting and waiting and trying to get the power on as smoothly as possible. Not easy with that turbine. I know it sounded smooth, and when it was coming in, it was fine, but getting the moment when the power came in was always difficult. Rainer Vissel said the same thing as well. Fan car. Yeah, mega grip. There was no adaptation required. That was just like unbelievable grip. When Nicky won that 78 Swedish Grand Prix in the fan car, you never saw him out of shape at all. It was just like unbelievable grip everywhere. So, yeah, end of story. Six-wheeler. Patrick Depailler. I knew Patrick very well, and Patrick used to love driving that car. If he could get if you get the front end to work correctly, which you could most of the time with those four tiny front wheels he had, and then get the thing into oversteer, it was actually a really well balanced car. But it wasn't, in terms of the balance and the drift that he was able to get in that car. I often said to him, does it feel very different? He said, no, when you're drifting the car, it feels just like the Alpine or the other cars I have raced. So again, a quick driver in that six-wheel Tyrrell was always going to be quick. Ronnie Peterson, Jody Scheckter, Patrick Depailler. And they were all really good in that car when it was good, if you see what I mean. CVT. Again, Keke Rosberg did the only test for Williams with the CVT. And no, I think there were a couple of others, weren't there? There were there. Did March have one? Anyway, certainly the Williams CVT would have been the best at the time as a John Sutton design, and under the auspices of Patrick Head, and that was that was amazing. That was good in the wet, and it was good everywhere. It was, but again, a quick driver is a quick driver, and they're always going to adapt to things like that because they've got it in their whole field of operation. They don't need to be doing anything different. It's, I'll do a bit of this now because I've got the CVT. I'm going to be working. I can work a lot more just on the traction of the car now and be a lot kinder to the throttle or whatever it would have been. So again, I think there's quite a lot of these days. It mainly seems to be centered around Daniel Ricciardo, who apparently at some point has said, this type of car doesn't still suit my style of driving, and McLaren need to change it, or AlphaTauri need to change, or whatever it is. I don't buy any of that. To me, a quick driver is a quick driver. And Mika Hakkinen, when they gave Mika that extra left brake pedal on the left, so he had two brake pedals in effect, and he was able to basically create mega oversteer on fast corners when prior to that they just had understeer. He was just using that brake as this sort of brake steer thing. It took him 3 laps to get used to that. That's a pretty serious thing. I don't think he adapted anything like as well as Mika. He got it to work really well, but I think Mika was just on it like that because it was just a completely natural thing for him to want to have oversteer when previously he had understeer, and he just loved it. Total adaptation. Yeah. So, yeah. Good question, though. Interesting to talk about all those cars and those times and all that stuff. Aaron, another one from Aaron. Okay, well, because it was a good question, I'll give you another go, mate. Yeah, no worries. No worries. Where are we? Text. Here we go. Speaking of which, what has happened to Australia in the Rugby World Cup? Please. Terrible. Right. And also, how do you think Qatar would have played out if Pirelli weren't the only tyre manufacturer? Well, this is, I did actually make a whole lot of notes about that before I did the video on the Saturday in Qatar, but I didn't go on about it because it was such a, I don't know, I was quite late and everything, and I just didn't think there was enough time to justify getting into all that detail. But you're absolutely right to make that point, which is that, of course, the big difference between Indy 05 and Qatar 2023 was that Pirelli were monopoly And in Indy, we had Michelin v Bridgestone. And that's why they were able to make a change, if you like, to the track design with albeit curbs and track limits. Nothing major, but nonetheless a change that required a warm-up session before the shootout. And they were able to do that because Pirelli were in a monopoly. And it makes you think what would have happened if there had been another tyre company there. Because it would have been, I mean, the thing about Indy 05 was that Bernie and Max were not massive Michelin fans. And so when this opportunity came to hang Michelin out to dry in the United States, not an unimportant market for Michelin, they took it with both hands and hung them out to dry completely, to the point where 18 months later they pulled out of Formula One. Not only that, but a few other bits and bobs that came along, like being accused of cheating and so forth. And so that was very political, as distinct from pure sporting, technology. It was a political thing, the way Indy went in 05. And in Qatar, I think, as I said at the time, I think Formula One rallied round, kind of, and did the job that Pirelli needed done. And at the end of the day, there were no tyre dramas in the Grand Prix. And Pirelli were pretty good in predicting the number of laps that should be done on each set of tyres. I mean, it's interesting that Max and Red Bull had total confidence in Pirelli, to the point that they ran 4 laps longer than anybody else. And there was an argument, certainly in my brain there was an argument, that if you've got a car that is that good and a driver that is that good, would you really want to go into that sort of no man's land with those extra 4 laps when you don't really need to? It would have been closer with McLaren, but he didn't really need to. And they were in uncharted territory, of course. But obviously Pirelli had said, no, 19 laps, 18 laps, do it, no problem. And that's quite a big thing to be able to predict that and say that, bearing in mind that the track conditions obviously changed as the weekend progressed anyway. So yeah, it's a good question, and I think we're lucky that in this occasion that Pirelli were in a monopoly, because if they weren't, it would have been a mess, absolutely for sure. Because if I don't know who else it would have been. I doubt it'll be Michelin again after the way they've been treated, as I've just mentioned. But let's say it was, I don't know, Hankook, and their tyres were perfect without any issues whatsoever over the curbs. Would they have actually endorsed the change to the curbs and the track limits and so forth? And what would they have done about the 3 pit stop rule anyway? I don't think they would have approved it. And I'm sure they would have had some sort of vote that would have allowed them to vote against that. So we were lucky in a way. And it won't be the last time Pirelli are in that situation. I'm amazed, actually, that they've been as, well suited to these 18-inch tyres and these enormously heavy, annoying Formula One cars, as well as they have. I mean, it's unbelievable, really. They haven't had more issues. But this was one. And it was mainly due to the MotoGP aspect of the whole Qatar thing, which in turn was mainly due to Formula One. As I did say in the videos, Formula One's, got to have as many races as possible, and there's Qatar out there, let's put a race on there. And sometimes you need to be able to say, is it the right thing to do to race with those curbs? But Formula One is so desperate to put on as many races as possible, to make as much money as possible in an era when there's nothing like the same amount of money coming directly from sponsorship. The money now is coming basically from TV and all the rights that go with promoting a race. Because of that, the more races you have, the more money they're going to make. That's simple as that. But in the older days, because there was more direct sponsorship to the teams, having to put on 1 million races a year wasn't such an important thing. Marina Nora Rodriguez Hughes. One more, Peter. Can you tell us a little bit more about your relationship with Carlos? How was his time at Ferrari? Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a big subject. My relationship with Carlos was, it began actually, I guess, really back end of, I mean, I got to know him pretty well in 72, 73. And by the back end of 74, we were pretty close. And he'd won 4 Grand Prix that year for Brabham. And I remember him over that winter being very nervous about what was going to happen down the road with the Cosworth engine, because he'd already heard stories about Bernie wanting to go to the Alpha, which he didn't want to do, the Alpha engine, and because he knew he could win a championship in a Brabham DFV Cosworth, and sure enough, all the things that he predicted came true. So I was in the middle of all that stuff, and I was in quite a lot of face-to-face stuff with Bernie at the time, representing Carlos, and equally, I was right there in the middle of it when he went to Ferrari and did that deal, and I remember hanging out with him in Lloret de Mar in Spain. He was staying with Alex Soler-Roig, actually, just before he had his first race for Ferrari at Monza in 76. And I remember Carlos, he taught me how to perfectly leather a car once you'd washed it, how to get the water off. Because I did my usual thing of squeezing it and doing that. And he said, no, you must do it like this. And everything was in a perfect line and absolutely beautifully done, which is another Carlos thing. He's very linear person. And if you look at his signature, it's very linear. And I remember once driving with him from the hotel in Montreal to the track. And you go over an old bridge. And because of the weather in Montreal, unbelievably cold in winter, pretty hot in summer, like all these roads, and because it was an elevated road, all the seams of the tarmac had got big lumps on it, and everything was very bumpy. And there was a corner, a right-hand corner, and as we went round it, Carlos sort of went off in this very odd line in his road car. I said, oh, wow, interesting line, Carlos. It's not raining or anything. He said, no, I must hit in 90 degree. And he couldn't allow himself to go over the seams of the road on a corner without going over them at exactly 90 degrees. He couldn't go over. He didn't want jump. He wanted jump. He didn't want jump. He didn't want the 4 wheels going over at different times. And that was very Carlos. And he was a perfectionist, absolute perfectionist when it came to driving and to the lap and the way that the car could be driven and what was the perfect lap. And I don't think he ever felt he did the perfect lap, but he got somewhere near it. I think he felt Monza 81 qualifying lap was probably the best lap he ever did. Maybe Monaco 78 at pole as well. Those Ferrari years, yeah, he was very close to Luca Montezemolo. They had a lot in common. Fiat Argentina were very keen on Carlos being at Ferrari, and Carlos was close to the Fiat people anyway at the time. He'd driven Fiats in rallies in Argentina before he got into proper motor racing. He knew all the Fiat people there. Luca Montezemolo was very keen to promote Fiat in Argentina. And so, yeah, Carlos was always on the list of drivers and pushed really hard to get that drive. And it meant basically walking out of the Brabham thing, which Bernie was really, not very happy about or easy with. And of course, it was a very difficult Ferrari debut because it was Nicky's comeback race after his Nürburgring accident. And so Carlos was kind of had his eyes in the headlights that weekend, really, with all the stuff going on with Nicky. And was Nicky... he qualified pretty well. He didn't race that well. I think he was he just felt a bit on the outside because Nicky made it very clear that he didn't want Carlos in the other car in 77. And of course that was always going to be the plan. And he was in the car in 77 and Clay left. And it was never easy with Nicky. And Nicky was never, people today talk about, do drivers keep stuff to themselves? Yes, they do. Certainly Nicky did. And Carlos, I think, was pretty much in awe again of Nicky and his chief mechanic, Emmanuel Kogi, one of the best in the business. He'd been at Gulf, Porsche, he'd been all over the place. Really, really good mechanic. And he was Nicky's guy. And Carlos always said, he was with Antonio Bellantani. He was also very good. But he always said, there was nobody better on fuel mixtures than Kogi. And that, a lot of it was about mixtures. It was tiny details like that. But he loved Ferrari. He always said the brakes were brilliant, the gearbox was brilliant. He loved the days at Fiorano. He loved staying at the Canal Grande hotel in Modena. And I think he loved the whole coming back to Argentina as a Ferrari driver as well, and the red overalls and the helmet. In fact, I think I've got a picture here. This is very odd. I may not be able to find it. Excuse me if I can't. But I thought I had a picture of him when he did that race. He did that demo lap at. I can't find it. He did that demo lap at Buenos Aires in a Ferrari, didn't he? About 84, I think, after he'd retired. 85, and at the time he did would have put him like middle of the grid. And he was an unbelievably good driver, Carlos. One of the best, and I mean that in terms of perpetuity. I don't mean just that in terms of his era. He was absolute class act. Not a great race driver. I'm not sure he really enjoyed, only because he had so many disappointing races that were out of his control. I think that was the issue. And he was, don't forget, he was around in the middle of that ridiculous era of Cosworth engines versus the 1.5 litre turbo Renaults and Ferraris, and you'd be sort of 10 miles an hour quicker than all the turbo cars through the corners, and then they'd blow you off down the straight. And it wasn't really motor racing. He hated that race at Jarama in 81. He hated the Monaco Grand Prix, in that year, all that stuff. But he loved Monaco in 1980 when he won it. I remember we went to that race by boat from the villa in Cap Ferrat, and we went back by boat, and then we came back again in the car this time for the black tide thing, and it was just him winning Monaco was wonderful. And prior to, I remember him saying that he had dinner at the Colombe d'Or restaurant above Monaco. I think it's in France, actually. One of the best restaurants in the area. And he was, he said, he was there with his wife, Mamicha, and he said, there was two voices a couple of tables away, and I knew these voices. I know these voices. I look around, and it's Frank Sinatra and Cary Grant having dinner. That impressed him. Anyway, lots of Carlos stories, many more if we had the time, but what a man, what a great guy, and what a good friend. Actually, I'm very lucky to have been able to say that, he was a friend, and we were always friends right up until the end. And he, we things like I'd send him videos of my son Jack and his golf swing, and Carlos would make comments about the golf swing, and or he'd ask about what compound Pirellis they were, and what Lewis was Lewis using different gears to Bottas and things like that. He was always completely on the case. Brilliant. Okay, next one. But thanks for that question. Very kind, very sweet of you to ask that. A lot of people know, what I love talking about, and some people are much too kind to indulge me that way. Let me ramble on. Right. So long, I've forgotten how to. I've spent so long answering that, I've almost forgotten how to do all this business again. My addled brain. I was away back end of last week at the Spanish Open Golf. Something else Carlos would have enjoyed. Oh, that was really good. Konrad Gubanski. Evening, Peter. Mega content. Thank you very much, Konrad. What would your ideal Le Mans 24-hour driver lineup be if you could choose Formula One drivers for any era, including the present? Thanks and take care. Oh, that's a good question, isn't it? I'm not massively expert on Le Mans, only because when Jim Clark wasn't allowed to start there in '62, not that I was around then, but I've read about it since, and he lost interest in Le Mans. I thought, I better lose interest in Le Mans as well. But no, I didn't. I covered quite a lot of Le Mans in my time, and I've been to quite a lot of Le Mans 24 hours, and I think you need to be intelligent. I think you need to be if you really think about it, Le Mans, the problem with Le Mans is the speed differential. And I think it's probably still an issue today. It's much better policed today than it was. So you need two drivers that are totally on top of how to handle the speed differentials that come into play. 1, 2, the changes in the weather you have. 3, obviously the night against the day, and therefore the fitness and the endurance required of the human body. and 4, mechanical sympathy, and 5, being very quick with mechanical sympathy. Not necessarily in that order. I don't know. Ask me a question like that and I'll always go with drivers that I think would be a lot of fun to do Le Mans with. And one of them would be Brian Redman, I think, because he never won Le Mans and he should have, if Joe Sifford hadn't blown up their car by missing a gear in front of the pits. So I'd do it with Brian, and from any era, I'd do it with Brian and Derek Bell. Pretty good combination. Nothing to do with them being both Brits, just happened to be very, very good. I mean, I knew Henri Pescarolo pretty well. I haven't seen him for a long time. I know he's had his ups and downs, but I mean, when he was at his peak at Le Mans, he was unbelievably good. I mean, it was a complete contrast to how he was in Formula One. He was crashing everything in Formula One like crazy. Formula 3, he never crashed as far as I can see. He was really quick, as he was later in endurance racing at Le Mans. But then he had Formula One in between, where he's crashing every race. And then he went to Le Mans and just finished every race. So yeah, it would be that. I mean, Le Mans, don't forget, there have been all different winners, haven't they? I mean, if you think about 65, when Jochen Rindt and Maston Gregory won in that 250 LM, and they just drove the thing flat out on the basis that, you know, the earlier it blows up, the quicker they'll get home and do something else. And the thing lasted, and they won the race, beating Hans Hermann. And, you know, the factory Porsche, an amazing win for Ferrari in 65. So yeah, I'd go for Brian and Derek. I mean, what a laugh you'd have with those two guys as well. Brilliant. Good question there, Conrad. Thank you very much for that. Excellent. Paolo Souza. Hi, Peter. Well, you know, I'm going to have to remember all these. The best 5, the best 3, the best 6. It's always difficult things, isn't it? Because whatever you say, you've always left somebody out. So let's see what this is. 5 best Brazilian drivers. I'm not going to think about the number 5. I'm just going to tell you all the mega Brazilian drivers that I knew. Well, obviously Emerson. So Emerson. I'd say Carlos Pache. Ayrton Senna, obviously. Felipe Massa. That's 4 straight away. And who am I getting? It's going to be a difficult one, this, isn't it? I'm going to stick to those 4 at the moment. How would I rank them? I would still put Emerson first, only because he was the trailblazer, and when he was at his peak, he was much better than everybody, I think, today realizes. He was really good. He was really good in 72, 73, even 74, but particularly 72, 73, he was really good. Total pro, very fast, very professional. And he drove a Lotus, you know, which is, you know, amazing from a fragility point of view. No, he was outstandingly good. So I'd still put Emerson there. Then you'd obviously have to put Ayrton very near him, because Ayrton was so, well, he was what he was. I mean, he was incredibly fast, and I'm sure Emerson, you know, reveres Ayrton, and he would be embarrassed to hear somebody like me putting him slightly ahead of Emerson. But I only do it because Emerson, it was a completely unpaved road when he started it all, and it's because of Emerson that Ayrton came along. So you have to take that into account, I think, when you think about the drivers, his contribution to the sport and what he did, what he was capable of. Carlos Pache, very, very quick. A little bit tough on tyres. You know, he would have been sort of, I think he was somewhere near Mika. I think he was really good, Carlos Pache. I'm not sure he was that adaptive, and I don't think he was as good as Carlos in the Brabhams, but I think he was pretty near. His only shortcoming really was that penchant for velvet suits, which I think I might have mentioned, but I remember once getting a copy of a bill from a local, I don't know how I got it, but it was for Carlos Pache's 7 dark green velvet suits being dry cleaned. So yeah, I mean that was always slightly dodgy, but no, I'm only joking. Obviously, Carlos Pache was really good. Jose Carlos Pache, Moco, and Felipe, really good as well. I mean, to beat Michael Schumacher on equal terms at Ferrari, on occasion, particularly places like Turkey, you don't do that very easily. That's very impressive, isn't it? And I think I think he definitely is underrated, Felipe. Very, very good. Very good. Although the future, I mean, Drugovic, I think, is very good. I just don't know what he was doing signing that thing with Aston Martin, because, he's paying to be there, and he's paying to be a very quick young driver in a team where the young driver, son of the owner, isn't ever going to want to be blown away by a young, quick driver. So I don't see how his opportunity is going to come there unless everything magically changes there. It's a bit of a waste not to be seeing Drugovic in a car. I think he's really good. So am I allowed to put him in there? No, it's too early to put him in there, I think, isn't it? So anyway, I'm going to stick to those four. It's going to be too difficult below that, I think. Is it? I'll probably think of somebody else in a minute. Anyway, thanks for that question. Very good. Interesting, these questions that people have, isn't it? I wonder if they've been thinking about these for a long time, and finally get the chance to ask this question. It's only my opinion anyway. I mean, how much does it matters anyway? Right, next one. Quite a lot going on here, isn't there? Karma in Babylon. Yeah, I've had you before, Karma. Thank you. Hi, PW. Ron Dennis managed Team Ayrton and Alain, Kimi and Juan Pablo, Lewis and Fernando. What do you think he'd say to Lewis and George after Qatar? And Francois Cevert, Feb 1944, October 73, memories. That's a separate adjunct, I think, that's Cevert. I think he'd probably say what he said on the pit wall when Ayrton drove Alain off at the chicane at Suzuka, which was nothing. He's just stood there in complete and utter astonishment. And it always amazed me, actually, that, I can understand him not having any real control over those two, because Ayrton kind of came to McLaren with Honda, and Ron was... Yeah, he in his own mind, he probably thought, I put this deal together. But in Ayrton's mind, he put the deal together, and Ron was his chosen partner, if you like. And so Ron wasn't in that strong a position. But when you think about Lewis and Fernando in 07, you'd imagine that this young guy that Ron had given this unbelievable opportunity to, admittedly always wanting him to step up and meet certain standards every year, but nonetheless, without Ron, we wouldn't have Lewis Hamilton. I was a bit amazed that by then, in 07, Ron didn't have complete and utter control of Lewis in the way that you thought he would. I mean, it didn't really show up in 07, but it certainly showed up as the relationship progressed. And I don't know, you would just imagine it was somebody that had been you'd had under contract since they were 14 years old, that basically they wouldn't speak unless you told them to speak. That's what you would imagine it would be like. Not that there was any, ground rules, because it had never been done before. But it wasn't like that, was it? It was like, after a while, Lewis kind of grew up and became his own man, and Ron didn't have much control over him at all. But he certainly had no control over Fernando Alonso in 07, that's for sure. And, how that got out of hand in Hungary with all the pit stop business, and then Pedro de la Rosa and showing Fernando what he had in his laptop, and Fernando then getting the laptop and giving it to the FIA, and all that stuff that came out. That was very poor, wasn't it? And it brings me back a little bit to the situation now, and I know that's what you're coming to. The situation now between George and Lewis. I mean, I don't do this tongue-in-cheek, cynically. I imagine that when somebody like Toto Wolff, or indeed Ron Dennis hiring Fernando Alonso, when somebody like Toto Wolff says, no, we're not going to continue with Valtteri Bottas, we're going to get George Russell because he's quicker and he's got more potential and he's the future, that he thinks it through to the point where he's thinking, what impact will this have on Lewis? You would imagine that he would. But all the evidence is that he hasn't and didn't. and so it was with many other combinations. I mean, Juan Pablo, that's a good one. Kimi and Juan Pablo. Did Ron actually know who he was hiring when he signed that contract with Juan Pablo Montoya? How well did he know Juan Pablo? How well did he know the way Juan Pablo worked and thought and drove, more importantly? Give me a front end that works and I'll take care of the back end. Did he take that into account? And I don't think they do. I don't think these guys actually think very much about detail like that. They just think, oh, two big names, I've got to have them. Bit like Toto Wolff, George Russell, yeah, he's the man, got to have him. They don't think, well, what impact in the medium to long term will that have on Lewis? A little bit like McLaren. You got Lando, and Zach's been with Lando for all these years now. Does he really think that Lando's at his best if he's got Oscar Piastri in the other car? I don't know. Did he think it through? I just can't. I don't know. What can I say? I think when going back to Ayrton and Ella, I think Ron saw Ayrton as the way to get Honda engines. So that it was justifiable in that sense. Whether or not he then said to Alain, look, Alain, I've had to sign Ayrton Senna. I know he's not the guy you want in the other car, but think about this. Without Ayrton, we wouldn't have Honda engines. So it's the future. I don't know if he had that conversation with Alain or whether he just said, oh, you have a new teammate. He's called Ayrton Senna. See you next week, mate. I don't know. Probably the latter. Francois Cevert, yeah, wonderful, wonderful guy. Dare I say, another good friend. I'm just looking up at my bookshelf here because I've got the wonderful book that Jose Rosinski wrote about Francois. And, well, here we go. Yeah. Actually, it wasn't, was it? No, it's not this book. Rosinski did one, but this is the Halle book. Not terrible title, I always thought. But very sad book, isn't it? I mean, even now, when I look at it, I just immediately go back to that time. But Francois was he was all, look, there he is playing golf, Mega. Look at that, Watkins Glen, putting. Unlike Andrea de Cesaris, who he's actually, looks as if he knows what he's doing and he hasn't taken a divot with a putter. Francois, big blue eyes, laugh, deep voice, funny guy, chain smoker, Gauloise. I mean, that F2 techno, really quick. Really, he won at Nürburgring, didn't he? And Villa, Hill Climb, things like that. Spooky places. And you got to remember that about Cevert. I mean, he was really quick, even before he became a sort of Elf Team Tyrrell protege. And he was just getting better and better all the time. He definitely, I mean, he was intelligent enough to be able to learn from Jackie. And when I say learn from Jackie in a way that, say, Jan Magnussen never did, given the opportunity that he had driving for Stewart's team. But he learned from Jackie and he asked a lot of questions. And of course, Jackie was charmed by him, as was Helen, and was happy to give him everything he knew. And I genuinely think by certainly Nürburgring, 73, Cevert was as quick as Jackie. And for sure, he would have been a championship contender in 74. It's a good car, that 74 Tyrrell. And but a product of Francois Guitter's ELF program. I mean, a lot of very good French oil companies put a lot of money into motorsport in the late 60s, 70s. ELF, Antar, BP, Shell. And ELF they did it so well in so much style, and Guitter was such a great guy, and Francois Cevert was like the pin-up boy of ELF. And I don't know, it sends shivers down my spine if I think about the atmosphere in France at the French Grand Prix in, say, 72 at Clermont. And it's, bear in mind, it's the summer, obviously, and that whole ELF blue. There was this great big magazine called Scratch as well, massive, great magazine, beautiful color pages. And I don't know, just to me, that was a part of motor racing that I've never since recaptured an atmosphere of excitement and drama, that whole French motor racing revival. And Francois was right at the front of it. I've told this story before, but I will. I'll tell it again for those that haven't been watching every live stream. But I remember flying back from South Africa in '72, and and I was sitting next to Francois. Really, I was on the aisle. He was on the next seat, and Francois said, "Oh, Peter, can I sit where you are?" And I said, "Well, okay." It was just I think it was a DC-10 actually, and there were 4 seats in the middle. So I swapped with him. So he's now on the aisle seat with 3 seats next to him, and his plan, of course, was to sleep on all 4 seats. And it was a time when they were starting to get a little bit tougher about that, and he had to charm the flight attendant into not only letting him do that, but bringing blankets and extra pillows and all the rest of it. And I remember him saying, I'm testing at Le Mans next week. I'm driving the Matra. You know the Matra, the sound of the Matra engine, the V12. And she was just like, who is this guy? And he got his bed and he slept the whole way. And yeah, what a lovely guy. What a wonderful time that was. One of my favourite films actually is Un homme et une femme, which is the black and white. It's mainly black and white, but it's Paul Belmondo, and is it Paul Belmondo? No, it's not Paul Belmondo. Who is it? I need to look that one up. Anouk Aimée. Anyway, I remember Anouk Aimée was the female star. Anyway, it was a great film because it was shot in the mid-'60s, and it was the height of French motorsport. All Ford France and Montlhéry and the Monte Carlo Rally and Henri Gréder in the Mustangs and Joe Schlesser. And when I think of Francois, I do think of that film, only because it's quite a romantic film, obviously, and that music of Un homme et une femme goes quite well with Francois. Of course, was a very good pianist and very musical as well, like Elio De Angelis. Very, very cool guy. They don't make them like that anymore, do they? Okay, here's another one. Oops. I've got a funny thing going on with the thing at the moment. Here we go. Sorry. Always have to think twice before I press a button here in case I delete something or do something disastrous. Right, here we go. This is, I'll just move this over a little bit. Let's see, there we go. Hi, Frank. This is from Frank. Hi, Frank. Hi, Peter. Hope you're doing well. Thank you for your contribution to Formula One. Thank you very much for phrasing it that way. Nice. Today I watched a documentary about Jim Clark. It was very emotional for me. I was only 5 years old at the time he passed away. Yeah, well, it's still very emotional. In fact, just the other day, who was it? Somebody sent me... Oh yeah, a friend of mine, Horatio, who races some very nice classic cars very well, is racing the Brabham BT23C that Kurt Ahrens drove in that race in which Jimmy had his accident at Hockenheim in '68. And so he also sent me and that was the car that was in the studio when Jimmy went to the German TV studio on the Saturday night. And he sort of sent me the link to that. And I couldn't watch it. I still can't really watch that stuff because it's too heart-wrenching. And I still have difficulty putting Jimmy's accident in the context of his life and his calendar year and his racing vocabulary, because he did many Formula 2 races. This was just another Formula 2 race. It wasn't as if, there's a cliche about it, oh, well, he passed away in this unimportant Formula 2 race, and it's sort of, that's the end of the sentence, and they move on to something else. But of course, Jimmy did, he raced most weekends, and he raced flat out most weekends. And whether it was a Grand Prix deciding the World Championship, or whether it was a Formula 2 race, and he was midfield because the Firestone tyres were not very good in the wet, was kind of immaterial. He went out and he gave it 100%. And that's kind of difficult to understand these days, isn't it? It really is. And I don't know. I think I saw a clip the other day, actually. I'd never seen it before, and it's of Jimmy. He's in the cockpit of a Lotus 35 Formula 2 car after the support race for the Reims 12 Hours in 1965. It's a Ron Harris Lotus 35. And it's a slipstreaming Formula 2 race. And he's been in the leading group for most of the distance. And then the race is actually won by, I'm thinking it's Jochen Rindt. And I think Frank Gardner finishes second in a Wilmot Brabham. Good driver, Frank. And Jimmy had his fair share of dices with Frank Gardner, actually. And Jimmy, and he's taken the helmet off, and the cameras are in there. And it's a Jimmy that I'd never seen, you don't see much of. And Jimmy's saying something like, well, if that's what they want to do, if that's their idea of motor racing, then there's not much I can do about it. But we were in this group of cars, and it's basically the circuit is just flat out in a Formula 2 car, just two hairpins, and they all came to the last hairpin, and they all just went crazy. And I thought, well, if that's what they want to do, let them get away. They can do that. I'm not going to get involved. And it was the first time I'd seen Jimmy actually articulating the business of not getting involved with maniacs as he probably saw them at that moment, and a last lap, slipstream drama at Reims, and because you always see pictures of Jimmy laughing and smiling, but he was actually quite angry about it, and that was quite interesting to see that. And I understand he was pretty angry with Jackie Ickx in '68 at Barcelona when Ickx T-boned him at the first corner and took him out of the race. And he not often, but he actually had a word with Ickx afterwards and got stuck into him. I don't know. There's just so many little things you can remember and talk about Jimmy. What I will say is that one day I hope to make a very nice film about Jim Clark. And I hope it is well received and watched, because Jimmy not only was unique, I think, as he was as a driver and a person, but I also think the era in which he raced was incredibly important in the history of Formula One, and specifically the year 1965, when he won the Indy 500 and the World Championship, Formula One World Championship, in the same year, stands as one of the all-time great achievements, and 65 as one of the great all-time years in Formula One and motor racing in general. And lest we forget, I want to try and make a movie that sums that up. There's also the Rat Pack era, which is pretty cool, isn't it? But Jimmy, yeah. There's also a very brief picture of him flying from Reims to, this is after that Formula 2 race, like on the Monday morning. He's flying privately to an event in Switzerland, which presumably the Swiss have paid for, where he's I think he's signing autographs in a department store for his book, Jim Clark at the Wheel, and then he goes to the opening of a Ford showroom or something like that. And anyway, there's a picture on the plane. Incredibly, he's on the plane and he's sitting in the passenger seat. It's only a four-seater. It's like an Aztec, and he's sitting in there. And there's a tray on the table with a cup and saucer and a little teapot, and Jimmy's there pouring the tea into the cup, wearing a suit and tie. And you just think, everything was so elegant in those days, so nice. Yeah. Anyway, here we go. This is another question. There's Frank. Okay, same Frank. He knows he's going to wind me up about this one, I think, because he says he remembers. What does he remember? Having the yellow. Sorry, get rid of that. Sorry, being a bit pathetic here, aren't I? Here we go. I haven't done this very well. But anyway, I remember already playing with a dinky toy Lotus Formula 1 car, green with the yellow stripe. I still have it, yeah. Well, I'm sure we all have a lot of our own things, but I got my mum to knit me a green pullover with a yellow stripe down the middle. And I actually found a picture of myself wearing it the other day, so I'm going to bring it into the next live stream to prove it. Probably don't want to see it, but it was a pretty cool thing, actually. Right, let's get on to some other stuff. So I don't know why this thing keeps sticking all over it. Okay. I think this looks a little bit more contemporary, this one. I'm not jumping to conclusions before we actually get there, but I'm nothing against the past at all, as you know, but I'm just concerned about all the people who think we should be talking about a few more contemporary things. Okay, Gabriel Boulos. Hi Peter, would you consider Austin Grand Prix a track that allows Charles to showcase his short corner driving and car manipulation, or is this track similar to Qatar where it's harder to reward such driving? No, I don't think it is a circuit where he can really find a significant advantage over Carlos Sainz. I can't see Sainz being a lot slower than Charles around Austin, if indeed he is slower. I think they'll be pretty close around Austin. Just trying to think. I mean, turn one is turn one. The really impressive part of Austin, I think, are the S's. As they go into the S's, it's very fast change of direction, but it's pretty line locky, pretty, judgment, car control, balance, all of which Carlos Sainz has, all of which Charles Leclerc has. But there's nowhere there where I don't think there's a place. I mean, maybe Charles' inputs are going to be slightly softer than Carlos's, but I don't think there's such a fast change of direction. I don't think that it'll add up to much. Then the hairpin is Michael Schumacher wide. I mean, that's why it is wide, isn't it? Because Michael wanted it wide for overtaking there, I think, when the thing was first designed. So that's not going to add up to much. Then you got the Ferrari back straight, which they'll be pretty good there. I mean, they won't be the quickest car, but they won't be slow there. Into that next left-hander, not much. Then you got all those twiddly bits. And then that long right-hander towards the end of the lap, maybe. But again, that's very line locky. It's not a place where you're sort of trading off brakes against turn in lateral G. Last 90-degree corner, sufficiently annoyingly slow not to be a major issue. So no, I don't think you're going to see Charles being significantly better than Carlos Sainz around Austin. I may be wrong, of course, but that's my view, and I think equally Lando will be pretty near Oscar, if not slightly ahead of him maybe, bearing in mind Oscar's never been to Austin either. Not that seems to be an issue for Oscar these days, but it will be in terms of getting in a good qualifying lap after only 1 hour's practice on Friday. So Lando will be going there looking, I think he'll go pretty well this weekend after everything that's been going on, and it's a sort of Lando type circuit. Who else? Who else will go well there? I would have said Liam. I'd be interested to see Liam Lawson, but I don't think he'll be there. Will he? Daniel will be coming back, and I think the two Alpine guys will be all right around there. So yeah, and obviously Max. And let's think about the Perez Max comparison around there. Perez will be good. He'll be quite good on all those traction bits, but Max will do him through the S's. The change of direction there. That wouldn't necessarily be because of short corners, just better feel and just suppleness through there that Max will have. Whereas I think Sainz has got more than Perez when it comes to change of direction suppleness, if you see what I mean. But Perez, out of the hairpin, out of those slow corners, he should have his fair share of places where he'll be quite good. And he'll get a half reasonable result, I would have thought. I sound a bit condescending when I say all that. I don't mean to be. I'm just trying to be, logical. Trying to be. The Pentagon Audio Manufacturers. Wow. That's an interesting title. Let's have a look. Hi, Peter. Oh, sorry, I'll do the... I think I need to get rid of that. There we go. So yeah, it's all this hiatus. The Pentagon Audio Manufacturers. Hi Peter, love the show, especially the long format. Thank you very much, Pentagon Audio Manufacturers. It is said that rookies need a year to get used to Formula One, but I never heard much about what in particular. Nah, it's rubbish, isn't it? I mean, look at Oscar. he's actually a lot better now than Daniel, and he's not that there's a direct comparison, but I think he's doing much better in the McLaren than Daniel would have been, and he's slightly better than Lando, isn't he? I mean, he's in his first year of Formula One. That's partly because of the amount of information there is available and how quickly you can learn. And I guess in Oscar's case, it's partly because Lando's probably quite a good guy to have in the other car anyway. He's a nice guy, isn't he? So, yeah, given all of that, a very, very talented driver with a massive amount of natural ability is gonna be okay in a good team. And I come back to it. Quick driver is a quick driver, and you often see. I mean, Jackie Stewart, 65, his first year in Formula One, won a Grand Prix, finished second 3-4 times to Jim Clark. That's 65, and you had Graham Hill in the other car, who was pretty good, world champion, and so it is through the ages. I mean, quick drivers have always sprung to the surface. Mike Hawthorne, Sterling Moss. Mario Andretti on the pole for his first Grand Prix. Jacques Villeneuve on the pole for his first Grand Prix. Carlos Reutemann on the pole for his first Grand Prix. It's you don't need a year to get used to Formula One. Not at all. Not if you're good. Not if you're good. That's my view. Right. Hans Horlicks is the next one. Horlicks. Sorry. Yeah. Where are we going? Here we are. In several races, we've seen cars getting stuck in the gravel. That's true enough. In several races, we've seen cars getting stuck in the gravel. How come that lightweight Formula One cars with wide tyres and lots of grip can't get out of the gravel in first gear? Well, for a start, they're not very lightweight. I'm being slightly facetious, but they certainly weigh more than my road car. And, it's a long time since, I don't think Formula One cars have ever weighed more than road cars. My road car being a 1965 Lotus Elan. But, yeah, they do weigh more than an Elan. And so they're not light. But the problem, as I understand it, is that they get stuck. They bottom out, don't they? And they get stuck on the floor, and that's the issue. They need some sort of ride height jacking thing where they can get out of the gravel. And then would they be able to do that with the rear wheels? I don't know. They probably wouldn't have much traction in the gravel, I wouldn't have thought. You need pretty narrow tyres to get out of there anyway, wouldn't you? Yeah, so here's the news. Don't go in the gravel trap. That's what, bottom line, that's all about, isn't it? The bunkers are terrible here. Yeah, well, don't go into the bunkers. Stay out. But that's easy to say. Yeah, well, this pin thing keeps coming up. So annoying. Sorry. Okay, got it now. Sam Van Harden. Now, you wouldn't be Dutch, I don't think, would you? Wouldn't be a Verstappen man, would you? Right. Good day, Peter. Hope you're doing well. What are your thoughts on... Oh, sorry, I should have got rid of this. Push to pass as a replacement for DRS. Drivers are saying it's becoming more difficult to follow this year and still need DRS. Cheers. I hope it never happens. I can't stand that push to pass thing. I think it's the absolute... I was watching a Formula... Was it Freck race the other day? Terrible, that thing. I mean, what is the point of that? You can't tell when they're doing it, I'm going to do it, and what they got left. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. It all started with Formula E, I think, didn't it? No, NASCAR probably. I think it's terrible. I'd rather have DRS than push to pass, to be honest. But I don't want DRS either. I don't want either of them. If they can't get past, they can't get past. And we still have great races when there's a car tucked up behind, trying to put pressure on the car in front, make a mistake and out-accelerate him, whatever it is. That's motor racing. Get rid of it all. Don't want any of that artificial stuff. And of course, yes, it is more difficult to follow this year because they've got more they've gone away from the original aerodynamics that they so carefully sculpted in the tunnel to make it easier to follow another car. And now they've gone, because of the ride height thing and the bouncing, they've had to make the aero more aggressive. And because the aero is more aggressive, there's more turbulence. And because there's more turbulence, it's more difficult to pass. So the odds of them getting rid of DRS are now less, I guess. But I still hear the odd rumble that they are going to try and do it. So I'm just hoping that they will. I really hope they will, but I'm not hopeful. And the other part of your question is, Formula One cars with wide tyres and lots of grip cannot get out of the gravel in first gear. Yeah, well, we just talked about that, and I think that's wide tyres don't necessarily mean lots of grip in the snow or the rain, do they? So the same applies to the gravel. You want narrow tyres, and arguably the tyres are too wide, and anyway, there's no ride height anyway. The thing's just sitting on the bottom, sitting on its belly. So yeah, gravel trap, you're out of the race. Which is the way it should be, really, I think. Personally, I mean, obviously, nobody likes all those safety cars and stuff, but equally, don't go in the gravel trap. Simple. Another question here. So, Alessandro Durango. I'll move this a little bit. I'd like to get it all symmetric. Here we go. Nice. Hi Peter, Red Bull and McLaren show a similar suspension scheme. Do you think this is also a key factor to explain McLaren's success? You're talking about the front suspension anti-dive, if that's what it is. Everybody that knows something about aerodynamics say that that's not a major factor, and it's all to do with the floor, from the middle of the car back. Well, the whole overall package, excuse me. It's my Calgary Starbucks mug. A Calgary Stampede. Love Calgary. Great city. And I think those details at the front are all part of the flow of air and how you're controlling that flow and what you're going to do with that flow when it gets to the key part of the car, which is the floor and the diffuser. And so I'm not saying that it's unimportant, but I don't think you have to have that, as far as I understand. You don't have to have that front suspension geometry in order to create the sort of downforce that they have. And don't forget, they're slightly different anyway, aren't they? McLaren have a lot of downforce, arguably maybe more downforce than Red Bull, given the way they can always use the hard tyres so well, whereas Red Bull have a much bigger sweet spot, and they can adjust the car from circuit to circuit in a way McLaren can't. It'll be interesting to see, I think, in Austin how well McLaren go, because here we are away from that hard tyre. So if you like, in a way, their advantage is less than normal. And they've got, they're a bit exposed in terms of the straightaway and other things on the circuit, just sheer traction events. So we'll see how they stack up alongside the Red Bull, the Ferrari and the Mercedes here. Be an interesting one, I think. In that respect, the race will be quite interesting. Looking for things in which to be interested. Oh, I shouldn't be saying that. We all love Formula One, don't we? So whatever's going on, it's always going to be interesting, I think, I hope. Could do without the sprint thing, though, couldn't really. Not. It's just so, I don't know, what is it? Juvenile? Not allowed to say that, probably. This is from Neil. Saw the 92 season review yesterday. Nice to see a fresh-faced PW running Williams. Fresh-faced. Yeah, I guess I was. The Mansell contract saga. Why didn't you hire a fast but melodramatic champion, one who already knew the car? Well, I wasn't actually running the team or indeed hiring the drivers. That was all Frank Williams. But if I had been, I still would have hired Nigel. So I'm not. What you're saying? Why instead of the Mansell contract saga? You mean when he rejoined for 91, or do you mean stop him leaving at the end of 92? I'm not quite sure what you mean there. I think you probably mean, getting him to rejoin the team for 91. He was exactly the right guy to get, I think. But then maybe I was biased. He knew the team. He knew Patrick. He knew Frank. He knew all their foibles. They knew him. He'd proved at Ferrari that he was quicker than Prost. So why wouldn't Williams want him back as a number one this time, as distinct from a guy that they didn't think was as good as Nelson Piquet when he left? So it was, who else could we have put in the car at that point? I can't think of anybody. I mean, apart from Prost and Senna, there was nobody else you could have put in as good as Nigel. So that was it, really. And if you're talking about when he left, it was only that Nigel had specifically asked Frank to have Ricciardo in the other car, because he'd always had Mario, Elio, Rosberg, Piquet, Prost. He'd always had unbelievably quick guys alongside him, and it'd always been aggro, because he'd always been, got to be careful when I say, he's been quicker than all of them, and in all cases there was aggravation in the team because the other driver felt that the team were favouring Nigel, which they weren't. It was just that Nigel was quicker. And so he was fed up with all of that, and he just wanted to go into a team. If Frank wanted him back, he wanted to be number one. He wanted the really good, nice guy in the other car who was quick enough to win races if Nigel had a problem. That was Riccardo Patrese, a sort of Sergio Perez of the early 90s. And he did a great job, Ricciardo. Nigel had a lot of glitches at the beginning of 91, and Ricciardo was always there, relatively trouble-free, doing a very, very good job. So, having established that, Frank then hired Alan Prost for the other car. It's a bit like Toto Wolff signing George Russell, or Zach Brown signing Oscar Piastri, really. You got Nigel. The last thing you do is put Prost back against him again, bearing in mind how they got on at Ferrari, or didn't get on at Ferrari. And that's what happened. And that was mainly, Frank felt that Renault would continue to support him and give him great engines if he had Prost in that car with Nigel, and Elf as well. And I think a lot of it was that. But Frank didn't think about the impact it would have on Nigel. I suppose he just felt Nigel's tough enough, strong enough to live with it. He'll moan and complain, but it'll still be tough, and we'll go on and win races and championships. I guess that's what he felt. Didn't happen. So there we are. I hope I've answered that question the way you wanted it to. I won't put this up, but only because it's such a short one. But Dennis Y says, "Hey Peter, love the show as always." Thank you very much, Dennis Y. Danby Crowder. Right, let's have a look. Yeah, where are we? I'm going to get this back up. Here we go. This is Danby Crowder. Peter, did you ever see Vic Elford race in Formula One? I rate him very highly, but wondered why he wasn't able to extend his Formula One career longer. Was that a financial thing or just bad timing? Regards, Danby. Hi, Danby. Very good question. And the answer to that is I never saw Vic race in Formula One. I did actually see him race a red 911 at Silverstone, the Daily Express Trophy meeting in '67. When I was there as a kid, just having come over from Australia on a very brief holiday with my mum and dad. And actually my cousin John took me to Silverstone, and we sat in the spectator enclosure, first of all at Club and then at Copse, miles from the track it seemed. But we had some great, I saw Denny Hulme in a Lola T70, I saw Vic Elford in the 911, I saw Peter Westbury win the Formula 3 race, I saw Mike Parkes win the Formula 1 race in the Ferrari. And I remember thinking, I'd already sussed out Vic Elford of how good he was in rallying and how he could come into racing and be so competitive. What I hadn't realised is that was on a Saturday, and the previous weekend, up till Tuesday, I think, he'd been winning the Tulip Rally in Holland, also in a 911, and had just come straight to Silverstone. He was really quick in that 911, sideways, front wheel in the air, really good. And then the only other time I saw him drive was, funnily enough, at Le Mans in 72, when he was in the Alpha, and Joe Bonnier had his horrendous accident and sadly lost his life at Indianapolis and Corner, and Vic was one of the first on the scene, and I remember him absolutely shaken. I didn't know him then. I got to know him very well in retirement. But in answer to your question, it's a really good question, because in terms of raw talent and in terms of somebody who should have won several Grand Prix, if not a championship, Vic Elford was right up there with the very best. If you think about 1968, the year after I saw him at Silverstone, I was back in Australia by now. 68, he began the year by winning the Daytona 24 Hours for Porsche in a 908 Longtail. Then he won the Monte Carlo Rally in a 911. Then he won the Targa Florio. Then he was invited to make his Formula One debut in a Cooper BRM, one of the most uncompetitive, undrivable, difficult Formula One cars ever built, in the wet at that French Grand Prix at Rouen, the race in which Joe Schlesser was killed. And that was Vic Elford's first Grand Prix. And he finished fourth. This guy, man, that is unheard of. I mean, that achievement is somewhere near Jim Clark's in '65. I think an unbelievable achievement in terms of versatility and what he did. No testing either. But then and he did get some. I mean, Colin Crabb, a very nice, wealthy private entrant, took Vic under his wing, and he then did a couple of good seasons in Formula One, but he was never in a factory team in a car worthy of his talent. And quite why that is, I've never known. I mean, why wouldn't Colin Chapman have given Vic Elford a chance? Why wouldn't have BRM, really? And then he went off to sports cars, and he was doing so well in sports cars. He was so good, particularly around the Targa, because he had a photographic memory and he just knew every corner. Same with the Nürburgring. And if you think about Vic Elford, that era, Vic Elford, Joe Siffert, Brian Redman, Pedro Rodriguez, Richard Atwood, I mean, incredibly talented drivers, and Vic was right up there, the very best. But that accident, 72, was basically shook him, and that was kind of the end of his career. But he was incredibly good in the Chaparral Can-Am cars as well. I mean, Jim Hall knew his talent, and he was super good in those. But it always, can I say, broke my heart? It breaks my heart to think of somebody of Vic's talent not being given that drive worthy of him. And I suppose in that sense, you know, and don't take this in any other way than I'm just talking from the heart. But when you see somebody like Lance Stroll, who's got the perfect father in a way, if you want to be a racing driver, what do you want, son? Oh, I want a Formula One team. Okay, I'll buy you one and create you one. He should be spending every day of his life with a smile on his face. I'm the luckiest, happiest guy in the world. I can't believe my luck that I've got this Grand Prix drive in this Aston Martin team with Fernando as a teammate, and everything's mega. I mean, and yet he's surly and, you know, whatever he is. I mean, he's obviously he's driving terribly at the moment. He's obviously very angry with himself. But, you know, when you see that in the context of the chance that Vic Elford never had and how talented Vic Elford was, you know, there's something wrong somewhere. I mean, if you're born into a situation where you're very lucky to have a Grand Prix drive in the way Lance Stroll has, you should embrace it and you should see yourself as the luckiest, happiest guy in the world, I think. It's amazing that he doesn't, really. I suppose it's life, isn't it? Thanks for that question, Danby. Very good question. And thanks for remembering Vic Elford, because what a star he was. Funnily enough, your next question, you're mentioning Lance Stroll. This has nothing to do with me having looked ahead. I mean, it's just unbelievable coincidence. Or is it two brains thinking alike? Let's have a look. what you actually say. I just saw the Stroll word in there. Okay, one more quick question. How did Rob Wilson rate Lance? Does he deserve the seat on merit alone? I think Rob actually rates him very highly in terms of natural talent. He also rates Marco Andretti very highly. So there's another one that's not getting the results or hasn't got the results. But going back to Lance, he does think that Lance has a natural talent, and he does listen and he does learn. Incredibly. So I would always doff my hat to Rob in terms of his opinion on people. And I know he's got a very soft spot for Lance. So does he deserve that seat on merit alone? Oof. I wouldn't really want to give that question to Rob, because Rob immediately then would think about the seats that he never had on merit alone and the Tyrrell drive that he should have got if he hadn't been bought out by Michele Alboreto at the last minute. So yeah, that's another subject altogether. But I think he rates Lance. But I know Rob well enough not to ring him right now and say, what do you think about all this business with Lance? Because he'll be very on the defensive, if that's the right wording. Where am I going here? What am I doing? How am I going to know when I've got that? YouTube, here we go. Blue Planet. Good evening, Peter. Hello. Unsaved changes. What's going on here now? Save. I better save this. Okay. Oh, okay. It seemed to work out all right. This is why I tell you, the more I ramble on, the more I kind of lose track of where I'm going with everything. But this one's, I think I managed to capture this. Let's have a look. Yeah, there we go. That other one, on the other side of the screen, by the way, United Motorsports Academy is the academy that I'm on the advisory committee of, and it's mainly Asian orientated. But and this Friday I'm doing 2 lectures, kind of online lectures for Mumbai University students. How about that? I say lecture's the wrong word. I think it's going to be sort of an interactive thing, questions and stuff. I don't know what questions they're going to ask. Bit dodgy, isn't it? But we'll see how that goes. Anyway, that's Shub's thing, and it's going well. You know, he's putting in a massive amount of effort to create a motorsport industry, educational infrastructure in India and other Asian regions. Blue Planet, good evening, Peter. How influential was tobacco sponsorship in Formula One before the ban? Did it maybe allow smaller teams to get money to be closer to bigger teams? No, I don't think it made... It's like all this business with the budget cap. You know, it doesn't make that much difference. The good teams are always going to be the good teams, and the bad teams are always going to be the bad teams. A bit like drivers. And back in the days of tobacco sponsorship, the main effect, as I said at the outset of this show, actually, was that the teams were more independent because they had this sponsorship income. And I'm not saying it was all of their income, but it was probably, at its peak, it would have been about 50% of what they needed to go racing. And then it dropped to about 40, maybe 35%, which is still a large amount. But these days, there's no way in the world the sponsorship on a Formula One car adds up to 35, 40% of the running costs of the team. It's all coming from TV rights money and from all the other rights that the race promoter has to sell to Formula One in order to have the honor of being a race promoter. So what it meant was that there was not this thing about having to do every race, and the teams are a little bit more independent in what they could do. So that was it. But I think the other major impact of the cigarette advertising era was that everybody got proverbially fat on the money and didn't put enough effort into scaling down the costs of Formula One and preparing Formula One for the era when there wasn't going to be any tobacco money, and ensuring that Formula One as a sport remained commensurate with other sports in what was going to be the future sports sponsorship marketplace. Because when the cigarette companies disappeared, Formula One was ridiculously expensive compared with all the other sports of the world, including the World Cup soccer. As a result of which, we're in there today. We don't have a lot of sponsorship because it's just too expensive to run a Formula One team, as we know from the budget cap figures. I mean, they may be a lot smaller than the teams some teams would like to spend, but they're massively bigger than any other sport in the world. And that's all a function of Formula One not basically just getting fat on the cigarette money and just spend. Bigger, better. And there was never any planning for the future. Planning for the future? A race team? Forget it. Most race teams never seem to think more than about 3 months in advance, as far as I can see. Even today, even though they might pretend to be blue chip Wall Street companies, the reality is they're race teams, and they're just no different. But the difference is that they don't have money falling out of the sky, enabling them just to sort of do their own thing with their own sponsors. Cigarette companies were also pretty lenient in letting the teams get away with whatever they wanted to get away with as well, and that was good and it was bad, but it kind of set bad precedents, I suppose, in business models going forward as well. So they were the main things. In terms of smaller teams, did Eddie Jordan win his Grand Prix because he had Benson and Hedges cigarette money? I suppose there's a bit of that, but equally Eddie was a racer, he was a fighter. I think he would have been there anyway, kind of, whatever the marketplace was. And if it wasn't cigarette money, he would have made the pound go a little bit further than most, and he would have saved the odd pound as well and not spent it, and he probably still would have had the same results. So I'm not convinced it closed the gap at all. It just made everybody spend more money than they should have and not prepare for the future. That was the biggest issue, in my view. That's what we saw. We saw the end product at Qatar. If people complain about Qatar being on the calendar because it's a MotoGP course and because Formula One ran there, they had to limit the number of laps per stint. That's because Formula One's earnings these days comes from doing as many races as possible because they didn't prepare for the future when the cigarette companies pulled out. And they just made the sport absurdly expensive. Prince, wow, I'll wait till I get this up before I say this one. You guys and your names, I mean, it's very funny, isn't it, really? Here we go. I've got to get rid of that B. Prince Lev Mishkin. Wow. Hello, Your Honour. So, hi Peter, thanks for all the amazing content. I'm sure you'll address it anyway, but what's with the weird Hamilton penalty review? Yeah, I did mention it at the top of the show. I'm not sure it is weird. I think crossing the track when the track is still live, if that's the right word, or hot, or whatever you want to call it, is a big sin. And obviously drivers know what they're doing, but it's a very bad precedent given some of the accidents we've had in the past of bystanders being hit by racing cars, and of course Tom Price losing his life because a marshal was running across the track during the race. And that's where all these rules come from. They come originally from there, and they've been refined and changed and developed over the years. And we have a pretty firm rule about that. And I think it's a good rule. I don't think you can have a half measure there, and I think you need to be very disciplined about it. And I think on this occasion, I think the FIA were quite correct in being quite, vociferous about Lewis. As far as I understand, Lewis has apologised and everything's been swept under the carpet, effectively like the Lance Stroll thing. But even though it's zero tolerance, it's like Heinz Prüller telling me once, 100% sure, I do not have your pass. No, have your room key. I did not take it. 100% sure. Ah, here it is. Yeah, I do have it. Heinz, one of my dear friends, journalist. Yeah. 77 Japanese Grand Prix, Fuji. Jacob, oh, I don't know. Let me get it up and then I'll read it. Let's have a look. Nobody ever says, Peter, your time, it's getting pretty late now. How do you keep your brain so sharp? Nobody ever says that. Only because it's not sharp, is it? I'm very aware that it's, whatever it is, 10 o'clock here. Jacob M. Van Tuyel. Hi, Peter. Thank you for your wonderful insights. Thank you very much for saying that. Does Red Bull now fully focus on 24? And does that help McLaren, among others, to come closer and therefore potentially win? Yeah, absolutely. In theory. Yeah, there's absolutely no reason now for Red Bull to be spending any effort at all on anything in 23. Obviously, you know, I suppose they want to see as much as they can. They want to try and 1-2 in Mexico, and they're trying to get a good race for Perez in Mexico. If he won Mexico for whatever reason, I'm sure they'd be delighted. Good for the sponsors is what I'm trying to say. And but apart from that, I don't think there's any reason for them to be even focusing at all on the races. It's just a matter of pride, isn't it? They don't want to be beaten by everybody in the last 4 or 5 races. Obviously, everywhere they go, Red Bull are big, and it's important to do well. And Max will want to win every race for sure. But it does mean, yes, in theory, McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari should win a race or two. I mean, they should. I'm saying they should. They probably won't, but they should. Given their experience, given their facilities, given their drivers, given that they're all on the same tyres, they should. Of course they should, but they probably won't. Amazing as it is, but we'll see. We'll see. And I think also if some people may say, well, it's not fair. Red Bull already starting on 24. I think Lewis is saying that, isn't he? Well, the way to do that is to get 23 over with as quickly as possible, isn't it? And they've done it. They've really done it. And here's the thing. Mercedes thinking, we got to build a Red Bull for next year. They'll build a 23 Red Bull, won't they? What will Red Bull have in 24? Doesn't bear thinking about. Adrian Newey, what a man. And his team. Got to say, and his team, obviously. Not just Adrian, but a lot of it's Adrian. What's going on now? I seem to have lost all my chat. Is that right? What's going on here? I've got a whole lot of all the chat I had seemed to have disappeared. There's a whole lot of new chat come up. I hope I'm not missing anybody. I don't mind doing this, but I hope I'm not going to miss anybody out. Not that I'm going to do this forever and ever and ever, but I want to try and get as many answered as possible. Say answered. They're just discussion points, aren't they? Just nice people raising interesting topics and subjects. So, Alois Amy. Sorry, I don't know whether you pronounce the S or not. I think you do. Alois Amy. Toto thought the car would be competitive in 22 and Lewis could have a shot for his 8th world title. Yeah, well, please advise Toto. That's the other thing, isn't it? How Mercedes have managed to... that's, if you think about it, looking back, 10 years from now, what happened in this era, you'd think, well, 2 things. One, Lewis lost a championship that he'd won in Abu Dhabi in 21. And secondly, Mercedes then built terrible Formula One cars. And it's incredible, isn't it? If you think about it. New regulations, ground effect, and they just cannot even get near Red Bull. And it's 2023 now. It's just amazing. Anyway, it's... Toto, I'm sure, I don't know what he's thinking, actually. I have difficulty understanding it, given the way he made the driver choice. Ever since then, I've been slightly confused by... I've always liked Toto, and I think he's a good guy, a real racer, but I have difficulty understanding a lot of the stuff that goes on there now. Whereas before you didn't. Before it seemed all quite logical. Sort of. What's this one? MVD. Indeed, Miller. Jolyon pointed out how 44 was trying to pin 63 behind Max. Oh, sorry. This is all start of a... This looks like it's sort of intra viewer chat. I'll get on to the next one then. That wasn't a... I mean, I'm sure it was a good comment. It just wasn't something that I really understood. That's all. Okay. Where are we? Shortpip. Hi Peter, I've watched the post-quali Qatar press conference. Lewis was so annoyed being there with George and Max. Well, Lewis was annoyed to be beaten by George. That's what that was. Max, I mean, this in different car. Lewis is, over 21. He knows that Max, when the Red Bull's working, is always going to be super quick. But to be beaten by your teammate, that's what hurts always. And Lewis, I would have been very shocked if he wasn't incredibly annoyed. And it's good that he is, because he should be. George did a better job. And that's a difficult thing to take when you've done a pretty good job to be P3. But there's your teammate P2. Very annoying. And that's, as I said before, all credit to Lewis in a way that he is able to live with all this drama, because it's the worst thing in racing to be beaten by your teammate. Believe me. There's nothing worse than being slower than your teammate in Formula One. They may not mention that very much, but it's true. Okay, there's another intro thing. Amy says, except that would have required him to beat George in 2022. Okay, all right, thanks. Yeah, you're all kind of talking amongst yourselves. It's fine. Talk amongst yourselves. Robin Vissay. Okay, there's a lot going on here. Ron Zero is the driver lineups. Okay, so Mr. Bungle was talking about driver lineups, maybe based on the comments I was making earlier, I guess, on running Prost and Senna and everything. Let's see if this one makes sense. Mr. Bungle, I mean, props to Zach Brown. One thing he kept from Ronzier is the driver lineups that had the two fastest drivers, even though that didn't work out well in the past. Yeah, well, here's you're saying you always think having the two fastest drivers is a great thing. And it is a great thing in some ways, because the closest racing, just as the one thing you never want to be is beaten by your teammate, the closest racing in Formula One always is when it's two teammates racing in identical cars and they're both great drivers. But from a team point of view, and one driver excelling, it's a very difficult thing to manage, as we're seeing with George and Lewis. As I keep saying, imagine if McLaren, if Mercedes had a Grand Prix championship winning car right now, what it would be like between Lewis and George. If you think this is bad, it'll get really bad. Maxter, this is an interesting one. Well, not interesting, but it is interesting. But I mean, it's slightly different to most comments you see along these lines. Maxter Ace says Lewis has wasted too many golden opportunities to retire. Can you envisage the ideal scenario for a dignified retirement ever? I was thinking about Lewis's mindset the other day, and I think when the Lewis I know and the Lewis I've seen in action for many years is, like Max, keeps his racing pretty simple. It's about having a good car that he can drive well and get on and win the motor race, and he doesn't overcomplicate it and he doesn't overthink it. And I think that's what's going on right now. I still think his mindset is Mercedes, great Grand Prix team. They're going to get it right eventually. I want to be there. I'm earning massive money for doing something that I love, and I still love it. If I think it, what else am I going to do? I've looked around the world at a lot of stuff. And yeah, there's things I can do in the future, but I still love driving Grand Prix cars. And why not? I'm in a great team. I'm earning good money, and I'm still driving well. And I don't think he complicates it any more than that. And I think it's that prevents him thinking, should I retire? Because most of the drivers, great drivers that I've known, never think about retiring. They think about changing teams, or they think about what would happen if they run a different tire or a new engine deal, but they don't think, is there a moment when I should be retiring? Because they love it. They just love that moment when you're getting in the car and you're putting the visor down and you're driving out of the pits and you're accelerating hard after the speed limiter thing. And I still think it's as simple as that. I think Lewis at heart is still a kart racer or a Formula 3 racer around Macau, and I still think he loves these things. Obviously, there are things that annoy him intensely, and there are a lot of things about Formula 1 he probably doesn't like. But I still think the only reason he can still keep going is because he still loves it. And I think that's the reason he still does pretty well. Yep, that's what I think. So let's go to the next one. That's a bit more chat going on. Peter, are you going to Vegas? I have my... Let's go back to this one so I can see what I'm doing. I have my Ferrari pass for Vegas. Look at that. Ferrari press. It's out of focus, isn't it? There you go. First US Grand Prix, Vegas Grand Prix, 1981. That badge allowed me to go wherever I wanted in the Ferrari garage in 81. Cool, eh? I might go to Vegas, yeah. I've heard a few horror stories about the race in terms of, just in terms of everything, really. So I won't go into detail, but don't know. Depends what golf tournaments are on that weekend. Oh, no, I shouldn't say that. Looking forward to going down to, just before Austin, going down to La Roche to watch the Andalusian Open on the Thursday. One of my heroes, one of the golfers that I really love watching, Wyndham Clark's going to be playing, so I can't wait for that. Young Jack Windsor's coming with me as well, with the Spanish Golf Federation. So that's good. There's lots of Lewis stuff going on here. David Johnston Raw. Now this looks like an interesting question. Let's have a look. This looks like the sort of question I might be asked on the Mumbai University thing on Friday. Rushing back, as I will be, from Andalusia on the Thursday night to address the Mumbai University students. David Johnson Raw, hi, can you say a few words about the movement of engineering talent at the different teams? It seems Mercedes lost talent a couple of years ago. Are Red Bull having the same experience this season? Oh, I see. Well, I mean, quite a lot of Red Bull people have left, that's for sure. Aston Martin particularly, but before that McLaren. And over a period of time, most of it seems to be working out quite well. I still think James Key is very good, and I think he will do a very good job at Sauber. The interesting thing is that the teams more and more are putting talented engineers on very long-term contracts. So it's very difficult now actually to move from one team to another without a 2-year gardening leave hiatus. And that's kind of messing Ferrari around because Ferrari are on the other side of the pond. It's, as I've said on one video, what their biggest problem, in my opinion, is recruiting if you think that the cream of Formula One engineering is in the UK, not necessarily British people, but they're based in the UK, then it's quite difficult for Ferrari to recruit some of this cream from the UK. Yes, they can recruit from within Italy and within their own company and from other European countries, but it's more difficult to get the Formula One people to Ferrari. So that's one thing that's going on. And I think the gardening leave thing is becoming more and more dominant in the way we have engineering movement now. And anybody who is part of a, I can imagine Red Bull, it is impossible to stop people leaving if they want to leave. All you can do is try to make sure they don't go straight into another job with all their knowledge in their brain. So that's a bit of an art in itself. And those is it HR they call it? Human resources departments, probably working overtime in general. But I was asking Adrian about this not so long ago. And, he just said, basically, you can do what you can do, but if people want to leave, they're going to leave. And of course he's right. And he left Williams and he left McLaren, didn't he? March left him, really. They ran out of money, but he left Williams because he wanted a stake in the team and Frank wouldn't give it to him. And then he went to McLaren and that was okay. But then I think he just felt it would be nice to go to a team that was going to grow with him around what he could do and from the ground up almost with Christian, who's a good guy. And that's what they did, with Dietrich paying the bills, and it's worked out perfectly for him. And I think it's because of that organic growth of Red Bull that Adrian's been there for so long. And that's why he left McLaren and Williams, because he went there after they'd won championships. So it's a different thing. And that's why he's very much a Red Bull guy. But yeah, this gardening leave thing is a big deal now. Very big deal. So, here we go, another one. Let's have a look here. And this is the time of the evening when I really have to be careful about not pressing the wrong button at the wrong time. What's my battery level now? It's only 25%. Yes, look how slow it is with charging. Unbelievable. Sorry, I need to just get this right. I need to do this. Here we go. It's just about there. Be right. Fine. Okay. Marco Gambini. McLaren 84 was the first car that was way ahead of the field and reliable more than any other car before, heralding 8 years of domination when Ron Dennis be acknowledged as one of the best managers ever. Absolutely. I mean, Ron's contribution to Formula One, let alone what he achieved at McLaren, is very underrated, I think. Tarnished for a while by Bernie and Max and that ridiculous $100 million fine thing they played around with. That was ridiculous, I think. Should never have happened. Disgrace. That he was given the fine. So if you think about Ron in 1980, not only putting together that deal with John Hogan and Marlboro, basically to take over McLaren on Ron's terms, but he did that because he had John Barnard under contract. He had the vision to have John Barnard under contract. And John Barnard, of course, had the vision to take carbon into Formula One as the new material with which monocoques would be constructed. And that changed Formula One. So you could argue, certainly from that point of view, that Ron Dennis's contribution is, through John Barnard and that deal with John Hogan, the carbon chassis. How many lives has the carbon chassis saved since 1981 when it first won a Grand Prix with John Watson? And how many cars have been built around carbon chassis ever since? How many other carbon products in Formula One have resulted from those original John Barnard carbon chassis? It's enormous. Lotus should take some of the credit as well. The Lotus 88 was a carbon chassis too, 1981. But it was a carbon Kevlar weave. It was slightly different. And that they were both female mold cars. Sorry, they're both male mold cars, which meant that they required bodywork. And the first female mold chassis, in other words, shiny on the outside, finished, all it needed was livery and stickers, was the 82, I think, ATS, designed by Gustav Brunner, who then went to Ferrari and did a car for them. But yeah, so Ron, first of all, carbon chassis. Then McLaren winning all those Grand Prix. And of course, it wasn't the first championship, because McLaren had won with Emerson in 74. And of course, they won Grand Prix prior to that. Even Bruce won a Grand Prix in his own car in 68. But Ron really took it to the next level, not only in terms of results, but also in terms of presentation and the ability to go out and sell Formula One in the big wide world in a way that nobody had ever done before. And he changed the face of organisation of the race. He did a lot of the stuff that Bernie's credited for in terms of race organisation and the presentation of the pit lane and the garages. A lot of that credit should go to Ron, actually. And then, of course, he gave us Lewis Hamilton as well. Potentially, one of the best known figures in Formula One history, probably the best known figure in Formula One history. Now, if you take the number of people that know his name around the world, and without Ron, we wouldn't have Lewis. So we wouldn't have carbon chassis, wouldn't have Lewis, wouldn't have the way Formula One looks today. And as well as all that, we had all those championships that McLaren won. So yeah, you could say Ron Dennis did a pretty good job. He's still doing a pretty good job, actually. I mean, he's doing lots of other stuff. I think quite a lot of it's philanthropic. All credit to him. Behind the scenes, doesn't want to know about Formula One, doesn't want to know about anything going on at McLaren, but so let's have a look. There's another question here. What do I think? Do I think, this is from Ray Mago. Ray. Do I think Max will dominate until 26? Why do you think he won't dominate after 26 is the question. I certainly think, I think he will. Very fast racing driver. Very, very good racing driver. I can't see Red Bull taking their eye massively off the ball to the point where they build a completely undrivable Mercedes type car, because the regulations are fixed anyway until 26, and they've got a pretty good handle on this car and this regulation. So yeah, dominate, may get a bit closer next year in 25. But I can't see Max not winning a bunch of races both years and probably winning the championship both years. 26, at the moment, Adrian's got a head start already. He's probably, for sure, they're thinking of 26. I mean, certainly in terms of thinking of the car and the power unit and everything else, that's all going on right now. So Adrian's got a head start because he's got the freedom in his brain to be able to think that far ahead when everybody else is still wondering how to build a Red Bull. So it's a sort of exponential expansion of Red Bull's dominance. So there's a lot of stuff. Yeah, BRMH16 says that Francois Cevert also a concert stand-up pianist. He was very, very good. So here's one. Rao. That's quite an interesting one. I think it's possibly because I mentioned Jacques Villeneuve winning his first Grand Prix start. And we don't talk much about Jacques, actually. So this question is, Rao, what happened to Jacques at BAR? Biggest mystery. My first season was 2022. I think BAR was flawed massively from day one due to the wrong people, the wrong management, the wrong way, too much money, decisions being made without too much engineering or motor racing depth. And I think Jacques just went along with it. He won the world championship, and Williams, I can't, what would he have been on? I'm only guessing, but I'm guessing he would have been on something like about 5, 6, 7, maybe, that sort of number. million, and probably with the BAR deal, which I think, was enough money out there to basically buy Tyrrell and then rent that massive facility from Adrian Reynard and then build this new Grand Prix team. And so you're looking at probably $750 million, I would think, at the time, from BAT, tobacco, British American Tobacco, and Jack would have got a reasonable slice of that. So it would have been a no-brainer for him to leave and do that with his mate Craig Pollock. But all the people were wrong, and nothing ever worked. I mean, Jock Clear was about the only guy there who really knew what was happening, I think, and he didn't have much of a chance because the car wasn't very good. But yeah, with Honda engines, they should have been much better than they were, and it was a disaster really. And Jack he was badly managed, I think, at the time, and he got quite surly and difficult, and he was just difficult. He went through that period, too much money, too much fame. That's why he didn't win races there and didn't go very well. But he's a very good guy now, does TV, I think, and bits and bobs, but he's always down to earth and we have a good laugh, and he's a good guy. I mean, not as easy a guy as his dad, who I got on with really well. Jacques always got a little bit of a side to him, which is understandable in a way, given his upbringing, but what happened to him. But I think he's a very underrated driver still. And when you think he won the Indy 500 and the F1 World Championship, and he was on the pole for his first Grand Prix, pretty good CV. Okay, here's one. This is an interesting one. I'm not sure I know the answer to it though. I wish I did. I was talking about somebody about this just the other day. Yeah, this is from Tim Thornblom. Sorry, I need to just move this over a bit. What were your views on Fernando's controversial crash in 2015 when testing for McLaren? I hope we'll get more information from Alonso when he retires. Well, on that last comment, Fernando's often said, when I retire, I'll tell the whole story about McLaren, which I can only assume means how McLaren treated me badly and didn't give me the best car and everything I needed and favoured Lewis. I can't imagine it's any more than that. I can't imagine that it is, and they deliberately sent me out in a car that failed and caused me to have a massive accident in Barcelona. I don't think it would be that. If it is, I'll be shocked, because I don't think it was the case. It was a weird shunt because he came out of turn 2, which is the second part of the that first corner chicane, and he went through 3, halfway through 3, and then in the middle of 3 he sort of turned right and went over the grass and crashed into the bank on the inside, which was not the way you can lose a Formula One car there. And so it wasn't a driver error in that sense, and it might have been some sort of failure on the car, some sort of steering failure or maybe brake failure or something. Not that he was on the brakes at the time, but there might have been a disc explosion or something. I don't know, a bit weird. Or he had some sort of blackout. And that's what I understand to be the case. I think he did have some sort of blackout. And I'm not sure he knows why that occurred or anybody else does. But as my understanding is that is what happened. It wasn't a mechanical failure. That's talking to the people at McLaren who were involved at the time. Bit of a mystery, a big mystery actually. And I remember I was in race control at the time, and I saw it on closed circuit TV, and kind of grabbed, and people said, "Look, Fernando's gone off." Yeah. And I remember a guy from, I can't remember who it was. I was trying, that's right. There was one medical guy that I said, "Look, you need to get down there because he's not out of the car yet, and we need to do some stuff." And I think it was Dave Robson or someone like that. It was before he went to Williams. I think he was at McLaren or somewhere. And he came out and said, "What are you doing here? You shouldn't be in this room," or something like that. And I'd already, I felt I'd played my part in getting a few people down there quite quickly and, trying to help the thing. But anyway, I thought it was a bit odd. somebody would take the trouble to do that in the middle of a crisis. Anyway, there you go. So Joe Arena says, hi Peter, long-term fan of yours. Thank you very much, Joe, for writing in. Very kind. Simon Kennard says, hi, sorry I've missed the bulk. Love the videos. Cheers. Thank you very much, Simon. And we're at 2 hours now, actually. So Nick, Belmondo was the name of the character. I'm not sure it was Belmondo. I'm going to look this up. It was definitely a Nukame. I mean, who could forget a Nukame in an Omit and Fam? I'm just going to look it up. Was it Belmondo? I don't think it was. Just going to look it up. Jean-Louis Trintignant, there you go, who was actually a relative, I think nephew of Maurice Trintignant, the Monaco Grand Prix winner. Yeah. Jean-Louis Trintignant and Nukame. Great film. If you haven't seen it, A Man and a Woman. Really good. One of the most evocative, is that the right word? I think it is. Films I've ever seen. And it always makes me think of Paris in the winter and the rain and Ford Mustangs and brilliant stuff. So yeah, just it's worth seeing that film, definitely. 1 second. I'll tell you one, going back to the question about Brazilian drivers. A guy, I mean, Rubens is another driver. This is why I don't like this thing. It didn't spring to mind straight away. But Rubens was really good. I mean, was he better or than Massa? Where did he compare with Massa? Maybe you could argue was even slightly better than Massa, but yeah, Rubens I'd have to put right up there as well. So I'm not going to put him in order though, definitely. Anton Human says Matra. Yeah, I love Matras. What a great name for a racing car as well, a Matra. And you think about Matra and Jean-Luc Lagardère. He was a young guy back then in 1965, I think, when he started it all, and they were doing a lot of space development at a time when the space race was really catching fire. But equally, yeah, let's build racing cars to show what we can do. That's our technology showpiece. And they build these Formula 3 cars, and Beltoise goes out and wins a race at Reims, I think. And it goes from there. And they're just beautiful cars, those rivets, the beautiful chassis. Matra, love it. Antoine Human, Matra, been listening to engines sound twice this week. Stand on the Dunlop Bridge at Kyalami and know exactly where the Matras were, bugling it out on the track. Information from Alonso when he retires. I think that's Alonso things. Oh, sorry, that's from the previous question. So let me get rid of that. That shouldn't be there. Yeah, the Matra. Funnily enough, yeah, you're right. Around Kyalami, the Matra was gorgeous, especially if you were in the ranch by the pool and you could just hear the Matra sound in the background, right up on the horizon there. But yeah, Clermont-Ferrand, Chris in the Matra 72, Matra V12. Oh, what a car. And great liveries as well, that French blue, and then they'd have Pescarolo had the green nose, and Jabouille had the red nose in Formula 3, and Josso the white, and Beltoise was white later on, I think, wasn't he? Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful racing cars. Matra. Joe Arena. Is this going to be the last question? Because I'm going to have to get on with some other stuff. He always says mysteriously. But you know what I mean. I got to watch a rerun of Colombo or something, something important. Actually, I was enjoying those reruns of Colombo on Amazon Prime yesterday, and I go to Amazon Prime today, and there are none there all of a sudden. I don't like it when that happens. Why don't they tell me these things are going to happen? I'm going to remove them all tomorrow just to annoy you. Happens a lot, that sort of thing these days. Enjoying this? Yeah, good. We'll take it away. Joe Arena, do you feel that Formula One is at a crossroads with regards to their regulations? It feels like the advancement of technology, electrics, are not in alignment with what makes good entertainment. Well, there's a leading question. Yeah, but it's not about entertainment. It's about making money and getting all the big manufacturers involved in Formula One, isn't it? I'm being sarcastic here, but they all seem to love all this electrification business. So there you go. You got Audi, you got Honda coming back, you got Ford. I wonder what Alpine are going to do. I don't think they've got an electric road car, have they? Or I suppose they must have one planned somewhere along the line. So it's all about getting the manufacturers, and then it's about entertainment. And that's when they then frig around with the push to pass or the DRS or the whatever it is to try and even things up. Sprint racing or reverse grids, heaven forbid, you know. And I think we may well be at a crossroads in 26 with power units and with chassis. Yeah. But I don't know. I'm interested to know what people think about electric cars. I can't make my mind up. I live here in Spain, and there aren't that many. I mean, I think about maybe I should get an electric car, but I think I'm going to drive to Madrid tomorrow. How many charging stations are there? Blah blah, and it becomes a hassle because there aren't that. It's not that easy, I don't think. And so you think, oh no, I'll get a hybrid or whatever. And so to me, it's all kind of difficult to imagine how it's going to be in 26. 50% electrification. Different drivers probably in many cases, probably the same teams, hopefully Andretti on board. We don't want it to be Formula E on steroids, do we? We want it to be Formula One. And we want the cars, if possible, to be lighter, smaller, more agile. Is that going to be possible with all that electrification, the batteries and everything? I don't know. What's the battery technology going to be like at that stage in terms of size and weight and mass? Yeah. It is at a crossroads, I think, and it is at a crossroads because we have this conflict of things between money, technology, and, as you say, sport stroke entertainment. And Formula One's always been a combination of those three, but more and more it is becoming more about money and, if you like, technology in order to get the manufacturers involved. But still, you know, if you said to a Dutch Max Verstappen fan, do you love Formula One? They'd say, yeah, we love Max, we love Max. But then if Max isn't racing, is that same fan still going to love it? I mean, is it about national pride and drivers from those countries? Or is it about people who love Formula One or love the technology? You know, it's the people who own the commercial rights think they know the answers to those questions, and we have to live with what they consider to be the correct answers. Whether they're the right answers is a story probably for another live stream and a long interviewer debate forevermore. So there we go. One other, did I show this picture? I don't think I did. Yeah, I do. Oh, pictures from the past, magazines and stuff. I don't think I showed this picture. This is from, this really shook me when I saw this. It's 1958 British Grand Prix, when Walt Hansgen, very good American driver, came over and raced a Lister Jaguar in a sports car race. I think he did a few races in Europe. He was very quick, Walt. And there's a picture of him in the Lister at Silverstone at the British Grand Prix meeting in 58 in the sports event, right? Supporting event. And here it is. I want you to look at the helmet he's wearing. It's very foggy picture, right? But it's 1958. It's on the right-hand side there. I've got a red arrow. Look at that helmet. That helmet, it's not a Bell Magnum at all, but it's not a bad helmet, right? For 1958, it's a pretty serious crash helmet. And he's talking to Sterling Moss, and he's in the Lister. I repeat, 1958. Now look at the picture on the left of Peter Collins on opposite lock in the Ferrari, winning the British Grand Prix in 1958. Look at the helmet he's wearing. It's a tiny sort of cork-based helmet with leather ear straps and Herbert Johnson helmets, they used to be called. And He was wearing that helmet, sadly, 2 weeks later when he was killed at the Nürburgring, head injuries, and thrown out of the car. And that helmet that Peter Collins is wearing is typical of all the other drivers that I've ever seen from that era. They all wore those helmets. And yet Walt Hansken came over, did that sports car race with that helmet, and nobody, this is my point about this, nobody said, wow, look at that helmet Hansken's got. We need to get one of those. That's much safer than this rubbish we're wearing at the moment. Nobody thought that. I find that absolutely astonishing. I had no idea that a helmet of that quality that Walt is wearing was around in 1958. If you showed me that picture of that helmet, and without Sterling in it, because that looks 58-ish with Sterling, but if you look at that picture of Walt, you'd say, oh, that's 1963, 64, 65. That's 58. I couldn't believe it. The things you learn and you find out when you just pluck a magazine out of the bookshelf. I'm very saddened to see that, because I don't know. I'm not going to sit down and do the maths, but I hate to think of how many drivers were critically injured or lost their lives because they weren't wearing the best possible helmet they could have worn, i.e. the type of helmet Walt Hansken's wearing in that picture. 1958. No excuse, really. And I'm not blaming the drivers. I'm blaming the FIA, the sport, everybody involved should have been saying, wow, everybody get a life, please. And they didn't. So there you go. Right. There we are. Thank you very much for watching. And it's now 20 to 11 CET, Central European Time. So hope you enjoyed it. I did very much. Loved all your questions and everything. There's a lot more. Sorry if I didn't get to you, as ever. Big thanks to Pitbox and to Jetcraft, without whom this channel wouldn't be what it is. And I look forward to seeing you again over the weekend. Very, very late to be doing videos from the US Grand Prix in Austin, Friday, Saturday and Sunday. So I might try and keep them short-ish. And we'll see what happens. Sprint race. What is it? It's untimed practice on the Friday. Then they go into Parc Fermé. Can't touch the cars thereafter. Then it's qualifying for the Grand Prix on Sunday, on Friday afternoon. And then on Saturday, it's shootout, then the sprint on the Saturday, and then it's the Grand Prix on the Sunday. So that is the weekend in Austin. So take care. Stay safe. Thanks for watching. See you soon.